when people talk about role-playing games, and here I'm talking about tabletop role-playing games, uh, I feel like communication sort of breaks down. And so something I found when I was reading not the most recent edition of Paranoia, but one edition ago, is they made this casual reference to, I think, Gamism or something. And they presented this as a contrast to simulationism and narrativism. Now, hold on. Fixed it. Now, just by hearing those names, most of you have probably figured out what they mean and can already see how this is useful in analyzing RPGs. But this weird thing happened in the 2010s where a bunch of Kickstarters came out and they're like, hey, we're going to save tabletop role-playing games from themselves. And the problem with tabletop role-playing games, they collectively announced as a thesis, is they have too many rules. When I first heard about these Kickstarters, they just seemed stupid to me. It seemed like people who were ignorant about the industry were putting their ignorance on display and trying to get people to give them money for it. But here's the thing. People backed those Kickstarters. That was a pretty popular line of attack to level at RPGs. And it's like, well, am I wrong? Do RPGs have too many rules? But I've played White Wolf. I've played Lasers and Feelings. I've played these games, and by my estimation, they're terrible. So here's my question. Are these games terrible? Yes, but no. That's where having this triangle sort of comes into being, where you've got narrativism, gamism, simulationism. What do you want as a player? What do you want as a GM? And what is the game actually promising to deliver to you? And I'm happy that we no longer live in the 2010s and that we've now evolved into the 2020s where we can have really advanced and civil discussions about TTRPGs. So let's jump into these three definitions. Very quickly, and I think you're going to get this intuitively. Narrativism is when a TTRPG is focused on telling a great story at the table. Gamism is when a TTRPG wants to have an interesting engagement with its mechanics. I had to reword this many times as I was thinking about it. But I think that's topic for a different video, is what constitutes a good gamist RPG. And that's beyond the scope of what I'm talking about here. Simulationism is a TTRPG that doesn't go for realism. I think that's the wrong word, but I would say goes for verisimilitude. Oh no, did I pronounce that right?
Verisimilitude.
Nailed it. So simulation is a game that goes for verisimilitude. The main thing to understand about this triangle, and the only way that it can possibly be useful, is when you understand that narrativist TTRPGs means it is narrative at the cost of gamism and simulationism, okay? Every game is going to have some level of capability of doing all three of these, right? The old 2D6 Iron Kingdoms RPG, which I love and is a prime example of a great gamist system, but what you're going to find, and we'll talk about this game a little bit more later, is that it does gamism at the cost of narrativism, at the cost of simulationism. That's why I'm arguing it's a gamist RPG. And so you have these idiot devs who'll be like, oh, my game is all three. It's narrativist, simulationist, and gamist. Yeah, moron, that's not what we're talking about. The triangle is saying which one is a priority.
What will be your first priority? I will have 7 first priorities.
The other thing is now, when we're talking about critiquing TTRPGs, I think you have to understand this triangle. Because a very common critique of Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition is that it fails as a narrativist game. And I agree, it fails as a narrativist game. But it wasn't trying to be one. Like, it kind of was. And I think the Dungeon Master Guide does kind of lead you astray there. But Dungeons & Dragons 4 is trying to be a gamist game. I also would argue that there are better gamist games than it. But combat in Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition was real good. You had fun options, you interacted with the board, you're moving around tactically. It was real good. I think it surpasses 5th edition. I think it surpasses Pathfinder 1. It was solid. It was really good. I don't think it surpasses this guy. What you have to understand then is a good gamist game, which I would argue 4th edition is, can be a bad narrativist game. I know a bunch of you right now are really upset that I said something nice about 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons. That's not the point. Just let it go. Let it go. Let it go. When you're critiquing a critique of a game and saying, well, the reason you didn't like Dungeons and Dragons 4 is you were expecting it to be a narrativist game when it's actually trying to be a gamist game. And I would also argue that second edition and OD&D, which I'm sorry, I haven't played, but I know by reputation only. I would argue that second edition is in the simulationist corner. But that's neither here nor there. But if you look at Dungeons & Dragons 4, you can say, okay, does it succeed or fail at being a gamist game? And I think games can present themselves as gamist and also fail at gamist if the mechanics are not fun to engage with or don't have any meaningful depth. Simulationist games, which I think are the rarest of the three types, can also fail at being simulationist games when they do not deliver the verisimilitude. The only one is narrativist games. I've never heard of a narrativist game that fails at being a narrativist game, and this is going to come off condescending, and I'm sorry, but narrativism, I don't know how you fail at it. Like, it feels like you're throwing the ball to the GM and saying, go do a good game. Like, if you're failing at a narrativist game, it's because your GM is failing at it. I'd love to be proven wrong on this, but I don't see how you're going to prove me wrong. I want to amend that statement because I already feel the hatred burning in your heart for me because I said that about narrativist titles. If you are using a game that doesn't want to be a narrativist game as a narrativist game, and you are playing it diligently obeying the rules in the book, then yes, you can argue there are bad narrativist games. That's actually what I tried to do with 4th edition. I tried to run a political thriller campaign in this guy. Whoa, don't do that. Actually, or do, whatever, you do you. That's why when we're critiquing these titles, we need to understand the triangle of TTRPGs, because we need to critique the art for what it's actually trying to accomplish versus what we wish it was doing. However, I think it's also valuable for you as a GM to understand the triangle for a couple reasons. First, it'll help you choose a game. I don't know that many simulationist gamers. They're out there. I've met them. Most people in my mind fall somewhere on the spectrum between narrativism and gamism. And if you know where you fall, then you can find a game that's going to play nicely with you. So for example, if you find yourself being narrativist, you're like, the best sessions are ones where you don't roll any dice. If that's you, just pick up any game kickstarted between 2010 and 2020. When did Kickstarter come out? Am I way off? 2009. April 28th, 2009. Haha, I win. Similarly, it'll help you understand your GMing style. And this is one where I actually find some toxic game mastering habits come from, is inconsistency. Because what you have to remember as a GM, not only are you the sole window your players have into the world, like every GM understands, you are the only one who can say with authority where the stuff in the room is, or what the tree looks like, or what's going on. You could argue that there's some exceptions to that, but just roll with me. You need to understand that you as the GM are also the only gateway to the laws of physics that your players have access to. And that's really important when you want to be consistent. And so obviously you're going to try and obey the rules of the game you have selected. If you're playing Dungeons & Dragons 4, you're going to try and abide the rulebook, because then you and your players have a lingua franca that they can communicate with you with, and you all sort of understand that when I swing my sword, I'm going to roll a d20, I'm going to add this modifier, and I'm looking at hit that AC. That's great, but every TTRPG, the whole point of TTRPGs is you're going to have to make judgment calls that do not fit within the framework of the rules perfectly. And when it comes to that, you need to ask yourself, okay, am I a rule of cool GM? Am I like, well, it's cool, therefore it works? You're playing toward the narrativist point of view there. Or do you try and find the best analog within the rules that you can to make the call? Then you're probably more of a gamist GM. Or is it, well, what makes the most sense in the reality of the setting? What would physics decree about this attempt? Then you're kind of a simulationist GM. Now, I know what you're thinking, and so I'm going to have a little reminder here. Obviously, you're going to try and kind of abide all three of those. If there's an analogous rule, you're going to try and obey it. If it's cool, you're going to try and make it happen. And if it makes sense in the reality of the setting, you can try and make it happen. But remember, when we talk about the triangle, we are talking about when these come at odds with each other. And so when you're playing a Star Wars RPG, and your player levels his blaster at the Death Star and says, I'm going to shoot the Death Star. Rule of Cool says, yeah, I'll let you have a go at it. Arguably, but bear with me. Gamism, sure, you have an attack roll, and whatever the stats on the Death Star are. If you're using Fantasy Flights, that's not going to do anything. And Fantasy Flight even has a little thing about it. But, you know, you can use the attack roll given to you by the system if you're doing West End, Fantasy Flight, whatever. And then if it's simulationism, you can say, well, no, obviously it won't hit. You have to make a choice as a GM. And what I'm telling you is you need to acknowledge, okay, in this campaign, we're trying to obey the laws of physics, right? And so if you shoot a blaster at the Death Star, I don't care what the rules say, the blaster's not going to land. See, I already feel like I've gotten you into trouble there because you don't want to, I don't know if you need a hard rule about it, but you just need to be aware of the kind of calls you're making, because if you're going to be bullying your players, it's probably going to be stuff like this. And so when your spouse says, I shoot a blaster at the Death Star, and you're like, sounds great, make an attack roll, and if you roll all hits and no threat, then yeah, you get it. But then when the player you hate in your group, who's in your group for some reason, does it, you're like, no, you can't do it, and your blaster malfunctions and you die. It's just sort of a way to mentally bookmark what kind of calls you're making so you can try and have a sort of consistency as you're doing it. Similarly, as a GM, you're going to want to acknowledge player types. And I think that is a topic that's been discussed really, really well. And actually, I would argue it's been discussed best in the Dungeon Master's Guide to 4th Edition, which I am talking about a lot in this video. That was not intentional. Types of players also kind of fall into these. Your players most likely are going to have preferences between narrativism and gamism, and some of the rare unicorns will be big simulationists, and that's fine. Again, none of these are better than any of the others, and you can all play nicely at the same table, but you have to acknowledge what's going on. This should be a general idea you carry in the back of your brain, not a governing principle that dictates every call you make as a game master. Wow, I stumbled on that sentence, didn't I? You know, leave it in, roll it. For our purposes, I'm going to break players into 3 meta types, right? Because that's honestly, most of them are going to fall into these categories, and this is going to help you understand and deal with issues you're going to have with them at the table. Again, this could be the subject of a much longer video. This is more of a general overview. This is your triangle of understanding TTRPGs 101. That made sense, right? That made sense. With your simulationist players, these are the ones who, especially if you have any engineers or scientists in your group, who are going to have a superior understanding of physics to you yourself. The way this can become problematic for you at the table is they're going to try and wield it against you, right? They're going to be like, well, actually, the terminal velocity of this blah, 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 blah. The important thing is there to just sort of pull them away from it, like, neat, but we're playing Dungeons and Dragons. Like, you can acknowledge what they're saying, but don't let their superior knowledge of physics ruin the game that you have planned, because your world isn't set on Earth. It's not set in our universe. It's set in your universe where you decide what the physics are. So go forth. That's why it's verisimilitude and not realism. However, these guys can also be a lot of fun. Simulationist players are the ones who are going to build a working steam engine in their inn room or whatever, or they're going to set these elaborate Rube Goldberg traps or whatever. And what I'm saying is, you can have a lot of fun with your simulationist players, just don't let it get out of hand. And you're going to see that's actually kind of a theme through all 3 player types. Narrativist players are super easy and super fun to work with. The ways in which your narrativist players can become a problem at the table is when they become so committed to their own character's story that they don't want to engage in the other aspects of the game or the table. The way this will manifest is often in the form of, like, they have big secrets that they make a big part of the story, but then they don't share with the table. I would actually argue that's kind of an anti-narrativist behavior, but don't worry about that. But then additionally, the famous, well, this is what my character would do. That is toxic narrativism, and you just stomp on that right away. The answer to that, of course, is, well, then please make a character who wants to participate with the party. Narrativists, when they aren't a problem at the table, are some of the most fun players to work with. They tend to be lax on your rules calls. They tend to let verisimilitude take a break. They just want to tell a cool story. Generally, they've got your back. They're okay with their characters taking dives so that the story can get cooler. Like, they're a lot of fun to work with. I love narrativist players. They are welcome at my table. But if they hand me, novelette of their backstory, or they say they have a dark secret that they bring up in every conversation, then we're good. You can find another table at the convention. Gamist players, this is the group in which I identify myself. I play TTRPGs because I like engaging systems. I like finding fun, new tactical ways to do things. And so this is who I am. And the way they become a problem is when they become competitors with the GM. The power gamer, right? The one who focuses on optimizing their character to the point that the rest of the party stops having fun. This is sort of the toxic gamer attitude. Toxic gamist attitude. When they withhold information from you, the GM, to try and trick you, that's gamist behavior. That's not conducive to good TTRPG environments, and so that's where things sort of become a problem. Mainly the way to deal with that, and honestly, the way to deal with any problem at your RPG table is just talk to them out of character. Say, hey man, we're all just doing our best to have a good time. Work with me here. Gamists can be fantastic at your table. They're going to get excited about the mechanics. They're going to know the system. They can be, I don't want to say rules lawyer because that carries all these connotations, but they can be rules advocates. It used to bother me when I, as the GM, was not the one who had the best knowledge of the system at a table. Not anymore. I love it. It's like, hey, look up the rules for drowning. Like they're helpful, they're fun, they know how to help everyone else have a good time, they do know how to optimize characters. The best gamist players are the ones who are going to not only optimize their own character, but help the party get the most out of their builds so that when they're engaging with the mechanics, which 99% of the time means combat, when they're in combat, everyone's having a good time, everyone's characters are performing at a high level, and you're all enjoying yourselves. I love having gamists at my table as well. Gamists, this is for you. I don't want you to overstate the importance of the triangle. It's a great lens for understanding TTRPGs, so you can sort of diagnose any problems you're having, look for ways to better connect with your players, that kind of thing. It is not the end-all be-all of TTRPGs. It is just a way of looking at their design, and one that I have found very useful. Anyway, I love talking about this stuff. I would love to answer any questions you have if you put them in the comments, or if you know me, call me or whatever. I'm definitely going to make more videos. This is a good time. I hope you enjoyed my clean t-shirt. No smudges, I think. No smudges that you can see, I hope. Anyway, bye.